Now, I want to talk a little bit about what's happening in Rojava. There's very little information so far about the incursion. I have information here that apparently I believe the Turkish operation is something like enduring peace as they've begun their incursion in Rojava. Now, this is very, very clear what's going on here. The United States, by pulling out, is going to allow what happened in Afrin in 2018, when in that case the Kurds were primarily portrayed by Russian forces. Turkey will go in, Turkey will commit acts of ethnic cleansing and systemic killing, displace people's homes, and they will try to recreate the ethnic character of a Kurdish-dominated area. That's the reality. The other reality is that, and it goes without saying, that of course the Kurds are enormously effective at PR, and no faction is perfect. But the reality is that what the Kurds have achieved in Rojava in terms of a democratic, confederalist, and socialist experiment is unparalleled in the region. They have had real gains in terms of cultural autonomy, broad-based rights, democratic decision-making, and so on. And they have fought extremely effectively against ISIS. And they are deserving of international left solidarity. I use this analogy all the time, and for some people it will never stick, but this is really the distinction, in my view, towards distinctions around pragmatism, how we dismantle empire, and also dealing with the realities of our world. I want Chinese and Russian presence in Latin America, because I think Chinese and Russian presence in Latin America helps dissuade the United States from, as an example, a military invasion in Venezuela, even as we continually try to instigate a coup there. I think having other powers that at least can punch their weight internationally, encroaching on somebody's regional hegemonic designs, is helpful. In this case, you have an incredibly small group of U.S. advisors and U.S. presence that is, in fact, creating a protective core around an enormously successful social experiment, as well as the rights of a large group of people. Is it contradictory? Is it something that could exist into perpetuity? Are there enormous historical and political tensions inside the relationship of U.S. imperial projection and local socialist experiment? Of course. Absolutely. And I would say, though, to some people who tweet at me about these things, the next time you're complaining about the political calculations that the Kurds make with regards to the United States, I mean, I would have to ask you, I hope your caviar order gets there in time in between tweeting about it. These people are in a fight for their literal existential survival. And we have an opportunity to, in an enormously small way, be very clear about this. This is not invading Iraq to establish a Kurdish state or Kurdish autonomy in the north. This is not an active and ongoing ground force effort. This is a small piece of the imperial presence that has as a spillover effect the protection of this group of people. Now, are there alternatives? Does there need to be regional diplomacy with Iran? How did the Kurds relate to the Assad government? Assad, of course, is guilty of numerous war crimes. Anybody would deny that as being totally dishonest. And in going back to the 60s, and we can put this up on screen, Jean Bajalan and I have a piece in Jacobin today called The Annihilation of Rojava. We go back to the long efforts inside the Syrian government of trying to remake the ethnic character of this part of Syria. However, politics is constantly changing. There's a constant shift in alliances. Do the Kurds negotiate an agreement with Assad? Assad might not be thrilled to have even more Turkish incursion in Syria, even as Turkey has supported jihadist elements fighting against Assad. What's the Russian role? What's the U.S. role? Is there an alternative in terms of diplomacy and survival for the Kurds? These are things we have to look at. But the fundamental reality is that an incredibly small presence was preventing ethnic cleansing and the destruction of a leftist experiment. Now, that's the way reality works. there's contradictions, there's inconsistencies. It's a very different example, but the Soviet Union absolutely had internal repression. I think anybody who would deny that is being delusional. They also had, overall, arguably a much better foreign policy from the perspective of supporting groups like the African National Congress than certainly the United States did. So there's a historical irony and contradiction that a U.S. empire is providing the security to stop an ethnic cleansing and to support a socialist experiment. And this isn't a projection in the future. This isn't a hegemonic project in the sense of this isn't Christopher Hitchens smuggling Trotskyite arguments to justify the mass murder and pillage of Iraq. This is as part of a huge mess of a multiplayer imperial game that involves the United States, the Saudis, the Emiratis, the Russians, the Iranians, the Assad government, all of whom are guilty of war crimes. One element of saying this ongoing small presence can prevent a greater imperial abuse, which is precisely what Turkey is doing. Turkey is going into a neighboring country to savage and ethnically cleanse a group of people and create a quote-unquote peace corridor that connects with its ongoing and long-standing vicious oppression of the Kurds. And Erdogan's shifting domestic political considerations as he more and more justifies his dictatorship, which we can call it that safely now, through a resurgence of really traditional Turkish nationalism. This is why the leaders of the democratic HDP Kurdish opposition, who present an enormous promise in Middle Eastern politics, this is why they are political prisoners. This is why there was the mass murder in Afrin, and this is why there will be a huge incursion and mass murder in Rojava. And Donald Trump may well have done this to protect the Trump Tower in Istanbul. There's weapons deals at stake. And yes, is there some level of discomfort and disgust at having an overlap with Lindsey Graham or Mattis? Of course. But that can't determine all of your political calculations. And I would ask you, do you have some disgust with a backdoor deal with no planning, no strategy? I mean, a left president might come in and say, look, our goal is to get all military presence out of the Middle East. We can't be an empire anymore. What's the plan to protect you from the hegemonic imperial projections of Turkey? This is a conversation that happened over the phone. It's Trump. God knows what kind of disgusting deals are in play. Gone. We're going to go wage a ethnic cleansing. I don't think you should feel comfortable with that from a global solidarity perspective. And you can go to all the talking points, CIA, blah, 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 blah. But I've given you the reality. And there's hard things. It's hard. Sometimes there's really true hard trade-offs. I think that the U.S. military presence and U.S. projection in the world is the most or one of the most greatest existential threats to humanity structurally. And in this case, in this specific configuration, it can stop an ethnic cleansing and support a profoundly laudable experiment that everybody with any kind of liberatory politics should support. So, and we will cover this more. I think we'll have a separate standalone project with Jean Bajelon soon. You just watched a Michael Brooks show video. Subscribe to get them all. Why wouldn't you? Don't be foolish. Click subscribe below and become a patron as well. Patreon.com/TMBS. Thanks, everybody.